Hey, everybody. Welcome to Question Christianity, where tough answers get reasonable question. No, that's not right, is it?
Well, hopefully it's right.
Words, right? Where tough questions get reasonable answers.
I think that's what you just said.
No, I think it's backwards, isn't it? Reasonable.
Tough questions get reasonable answers.
Yeah.
It's either way, maybe.
Maybe so. Yeah, tonight we're going to be playing catch up a little bit. So we've got a couple of topics on the agenda that we're going to try and hit. We're going to revisit a topic from a couple weeks ago very briefly, as well as touch on a couple of other things, and then hopefully take any questions you have. So if you have questions, drop them in chat, either on YouTube or on Facebook. We'll see those. So please feel free to drop those, and we'll hopefully get to some of your questions here in just a little bit. So in the meantime, as we're kicking it off, couple weeks ago, we had touched on, we'll go ahead and knock this out of the way early on. You mentioned you had something additional on this, Kevin. A few weeks ago, we had touched on the Ravi Zacharias situation. And this was just prior to the release of the report that came out on this that kind of changed things a little bit. I'm getting ready to re-upload some of our video from there, but I figured we could revisit and give anybody a brief chance for any additional comments now that the full report's out. And Kevin, you had mentioned that you had a particular argument to give as well. You want to go ahead and give us a little rundown of that?
Yeah, most everyone's probably already caught up on the final state of things. It was not a matter of any if or questionable whether he did these things. It turns out he did these things in much, much more than we imagined, and not only sexually but spiritually abused in very twisted ways. Many victims for many years, and used his position in ministry specifically to do that nationally and internationally without any accountability. Structural changes need to be made in not only that organization, but many evangelical organizations, particularly those that are built around celebrity Christian figures. It's the most dangerous sort of pedestal to be put on for both psychological and spiritual, dark spiritual reasons. Having said all that, since things are egregious beyond anyone's expectations, graphically so, I think that puts a little different light on the sort of moderate caution approach we were using to Ravi's material or work or legacy even. I can think of two really good reasons to not use, or at the very least, not mention or recommend the use of his work, his books, and so forth, anything from his direct platform. Number one, it's because it's so widely known, it's just going to be counterproductive strategically as a testimony to even the basic integrity of Christian apologists to knowingly forward this material and present it, despite the fact that a lot of the apologetics and philosophical arguments that he used are valid and true, but honestly, there's nothing really new or original there. He was a winsome presenter of it, but I think he's the last presenter of it we want to present at this now or in the future. So there's really nothing to be gained, nothing original lost by setting that work aside, as sad as that is. I really think it would only do more harm than good strategically. Secondly, and this came up in a youth apologetics forum, something about apologetics for parents, who want to start early training their kids to know, some basic apologetics. Very good idea. So, someone asked, okay, now what should we replace? We were using some Ravi youth material. What should we replace that with? And a disturbing number of commentators in that forum jumped on this person and said, why would you don't need to replace any of his work. Why don't you keep using it, with your kids and youth? And here's the thing, kids are smart. Kids learn a lot more than just what you tell them, but they learn by watching and seeing the bigger picture of how Christians and churches operate. Sometimes we get oblivious to things that kids naturally pick up on. See, this lacks integrity. They don't have the words to put it that way, but in their heart, something's very wrong. So either you tell them up front, okay, we're using this sex offender material to strengthen your faith, or you hide it from them and they find out, which they will. They certainly will, and then that just plants seeds of doubt. And if the whole point of apologetics is to deal with doubt, not multiply it rationally, I think these are two strong arguments that countervail and or outweigh any possible profit that could be used from continuing to use his direct material, videos, and so forth. I mean, maybe for private consumption, or something like that. I don't know, but I think it would be really wrong to put them out there, recommend them publicly for ministry use now. Okay. Thoughts?
Well, yeah. Well, I want to clarify, and then I want to maybe make a small side point. So it's I think one of the things that I heard you say that made the most sense to me was Robbie. Well, what I heard you say was Robbie didn't really come up with anything that was truly original to him. And so if you can get the same material, the same arguments, the same philosophy from someone else, why do that? Why go to something that has this tarnished name when there are other places that you could go to? Is that fair?
That's fair. Yeah. All right.
Okay. The only thing I'd want to add to that is maybe speaking to people who personally have learned things from him, and whoever the individual was, or whatever his moral downfalls are, if you heard good arguments from him, and they are good arguments, they're still good arguments. I totally get what you're saying, which is that's not the ideal thing to share. Like, you can find someone else to share. I'm talking personally to people, because he had such a big impact. I remember if anyone knew anything about apologetics, usually one of the first names that when I was talking to someone, they're just getting into apologetics, like Ravi Zacharias. Have you ever heard of Ravi Zacharias? Like they'd be so excited. That was kind of the entry. And that was actually one of the great things about Ravi Zacharias's, on the good part. I'm not diminishing the bad part. I'm just saying, he really had that entry level. He had a way of phrasing things that were very understandable to Christians who were getting into apologetics. So if those arguments that you heard from him resonated with you, and you found them convincing, and you're using those arguments to share with friends, they're still good arguments. It's the arguments themselves that are good. You don't have to bring up Ravi Zacharias' name. And I think it's actually even better, as you said, Kevin, if he didn't originate it, then it's not even like you're not giving him credit, because he didn't create that stuff. So gosh, there are phrases and arguments that I first heard from him, and I'm still going to use them. I'm not at all subtracting from the gravity of the moral shortcomings, but I would also say the same. I would try to do the same thing from an atheist argument. Like if there was an atheist out there who had horrible moral whatever, but he was bringing good solid arguments, I would have to deal with those arguments as they sat. And so it's just really important that we separate the two. It's like, look, we don't want to reference Ravi Zacharias because of the tarnish, and if we can avoid that, we get it, and we don't want to sweep it on the carpet. But arguments are arguments, and so if those, I think I'm speaking more on a personal level. If those meant something to you, you don't have to dismiss the arguments. You don't have to downcast them. You don't have to go find different ones. Like those are still good.
Right. Otherwise, it's the ad hominem fallacy, right? I mean,
Right.
we deserve it in the sense, but the ideas don't deserve the tarnish. We have to reckon with the arguments, whoever last handled them or not.
Yeah. Yep.
That's a good word.
Yep.
Yes.
And we have to do that. And the hardest thing, man, this is very hard for human beings, myself included, is to separate the two and keep both of those in sight. It's like you want to keep the arguments in one column, and you want to fully deal with and understand the moral repercussions over here. It's like, and you don't want to make the fallacy of doing either one or the other. Right. So you don't want to say good arguments, and so therefore we're going to diminish the moral stuff, and you don't want to do the other way either.
Yeah, we don't want to. Yeah, either way is either an ad hominem fallacy on the one hand that doesn't deal with reason, or some defensive sin leveling. Well, we're all sinners. That is an atrocity toward victims, and sins aren't all the same. The consequences aren't all the same. Right. So avoid both. Yeah.
I'll also say, just kills me. It just kills me when I think back to, hours and hours and hours I have listened to that guy. I at one point I bet I've listened to 100 hours of his material. Easy, especially when I was first coming. Gosh, he's just so personal.
Great communicator.
Great. Yeah. He seems so tender-hearted and caring. It just kills me. But there it is.
So, on that note, I'm curious. I'm certain we could all come up with some names that if we said, hey, if you're looking for a good apologetics author or speaker to refer people to, whether they're well known, they're
Kevin Smith.
Oh boy.
Take it away, Kevin.
Nope.
But what would be some names that you think do a good job? Again, maybe they weren't as eloquent as Ravi seemed to be. Who are some good folks that you think might be a good person to listen to?
Yeah, I could speak more to books than listening. So if someone else wants to go first, but
I'm Reasonable Faith, and there's a reason I belong to Reasonable Faith, and that's because I really admire William Lane Craig for the soundness of his arguments. Now, so we have to be really careful. We're warned about this over and over. Never put your faith in a person. I love my pastor, but my pastor's a sinner, and who knows if he could fall. I could fall. Any one of us here could fall. But my pastor's sermons are solid. As far as I know right now, they are solid. And William Lane Craig's arguments I think are just great and fantastic. There's a reason that I'm part of that organization. I listen to Stand to Reason at least weekly. Greg Kokel, I think, is wonderful. Frank Turek. I'm sure you guys can throw out a couple more names, but those are some ones that just.
So one of the names that I think would, and it's a historical name, and unfortunately he's no longer alive, is Norm Geisler. David Geisler, his son, has taken up that charge of continuing his father's legacy. Under Norm Geisler, there's some names that may be a little less known, one of which Brian Henson does a great job. He's incredibly entertaining. What about names that, and I'm curious how the Ravi Zacharias problem is going to tarnish potentially people who were speakers under him. So, because there were some really good speakers.
Michael Ramsden. I love Michael Ramsden.
Yeah, that is a problem that's going to have to be parsed out, because it turns out there were people in the organization concerned about it who tried to raise flags, and they were squashed by upper leadership. And those folks, I think, needed to account for their behavior in enabling this, because had it been stopped, 4 years before he died, that's that many less victims. Would have had. So I know a lot of them a number of them actually left on their own before the final fallout because they weren't being listened to. But some of the best known were such loyalists that they just couldn't hear anything negative. So we'll have to see, who those names are later. But that's the situation.
I don't know I don't know who the leadership was. I don't know those names. I mean,
you want to read the very lengthy independent legal investigation report that RZIM itself paid for, hoping it would vindicate them. You can do that, and you'll find a lot of those answers right there.
Yep.
But at least there are really good names that are still out there. Truth be told, Ravi Zacharias, I wouldn't say he plagiarized, but he definitely got
popularized
his. What's that?
He popularized.
What was that?
He popularized many of these arguments.
A lot of arguments that he heard from Norm Geisler. He learned under Norm Geisler, and a lot of these folks really do owe their learning to Norm Geisler's legacy, which I think is a very strong and powerful legacy that remains to this day. And there's a lot of great folks that are still learning from Norm Geisler's teachings.
Yeah, excellent point, Pete. And I think that's good that we can recommend some other people out there, because I agree with Kevin. I think using his material at this point is certainly something that could lead to more damage than good, especially for people who may have been victims of similar abuse. And even like you mentioned with youth, like, doesn't matter if they find out about it now, if 10 years down the road they find out, all this stuff about Ravi. This is who, helped solidify my faith, and he was fraudulent at least in terms of how he behaved compared
and
to
my parents knew it, and my parents knew it.
Right. I mean, from all these deconversion stories I've heard,
right.
I mean, that plays right into that.
Sure does.
Brings a really. I think that brings a really strong point of how we start to broach the subject of, hey, there's this person who fell, whether it's Ravi Zacharias or another name brand, Christian leader that, everybody has on their bookshelves, regardless of whether or not we agree with that person. There's a lot of names in under the Christian umbrella that, all it would take is one of them. We all remember the Jimmy Swaggart thing of the 80s or maybe 90s. And that put a tarnish on the church, quote unquote. It put a tarnish on a lot of things Christian. And there was a lot of people who just said, you know what, if that's the way the church is, if that's what the Jesus people are like, I want no part of them. And the reality of it is that we as fallen people, I think this kind of starts to segue into one of the other things we were talking about, is what is the real gospel? The real gospel is not, hey, did that person over there stay faithful all the way to the end? Even Paul was mentioning that there were people that were following around him that were, fairly popular in and among the churches of that day. And he was saying to the churches at that time that we are not supposed to be hanging our hat on whether or not they are of the faith. And there were people that were, of course, leading people astray. Of course, I'm leading towards the verse where it says, I follow Apollos, I follow Paul. Ultimately, we have to help people get off of the derailing tracks of following Ravi Zacharias or insert popular Christian teacher here, and start following Christ alone.
That said, I think it's important to say that as bad as this tragedy is, television evangelist aside, I mean, if we look at the vast majority of solid Orthodox Christians, this is rare. I think this is a very rare thing. I think the fact that it happened with Ravi Zacharias, as popular as it was, is one of the reasons that it's such a glaring problem. But just all the names that we were throwing out earlier, like they're the large majority of truly believing faithful Christians do not commit rape. Like that's not a normal thing, right? It's it's easy to see one or two here, and then you see the wackos like Jimmy Swagger or something like that, and there's a difference, and the vast majority, I think, are as faithful as we can reasonably expect.
Well, we have a psychological tendency to focus on kind of these big negative events. So in somebody's mind, it may stick of people like Swagger and Zacharias, and these kind of stand out as examples, especially to somebody who's already looking for reasons to step away from Christianity. And so psychologically, we're drawn towards remembering those sort of things while we forget all the maybe hundreds of interactions we've had in a lifetime with everyday, from people like Norm Geisler down to your grandma, whoever it may be. You forget the abundance of good interactions when these kind of things overshadow and kind of have that light bulb sticking psychological factor to it. All right, Pete, and you'd kind of taken us down that road. You want to dive into what the gospel is just a little bit more? We've had some questions come in on the website recently, as well, that just ask a lot of biblical kind of questions. But some people I've spoken with have kind of missed what the gospel is. They see Christianity as a set of religious beliefs that it has a religious text, but it doesn't focus on how different the gospel is. That's something I've seen people not get. They don't get how it's different from any other religion. And they just see it as another religion. What's so great about the gospel?
I was talking to a guy in a parking lot. It's kind of an odd thing because I get excited about the gospel simply because of how it's so much more than just a checklist. I think the gospel, a lot of people know, and they've heard if they've been around church. But if you haven't heard, if you haven't been around churches, and maybe gospel is churchese to you, Christianese
type of music.
It's really, it's not just a type of music. In fact, gospel has nothing to do with a music genre. Gospel means good news. And
literally,
what I want you to think about is, literally, it's the definition. What I want you to think about is that let me back up. The word gospel was used at a time when when kings and cities would go to war with each other. And, of course, in wars during those times, during biblical times, the men would usually, 99% of the time, it'd be the men going out to battle. And they would go fight on behalf of their city. They'd go fight on behalf of their country or their people. And as they were out fighting, they would send messengers back to town occasionally to just kind of say, "Hey, this is the latest update." And what people would frequently want to hear is they would want to hear somebody coming back from the battle yelling, "Good news, good news."
Yeah. By the way, this is they had. Sorry, I was just gonna say they had stake in this. It's not like it was just like a a patriotic thing. Like, I hope our team's doing good. It was like, if your town wasn't able to fight off those guys, they were going to come in and sack your city, rape your women, steal, kill your children. Like, so you were like, you wanted to know, like, what's the state of this flipping war? Are we about to all die?
This was life and death. So when somebody would come back and say good news, that meant to you that the people you had sent out to go fight for you had either won or were at least winning. And so when we as Christians hear that, what we are hearing is that someone went out there and fought a battle for us. Now, a lot of us on a day-to-day basis, the biggest battle we have is sometimes, finding matching socks. We don't relate to people fighting for us. Maybe in today's day, we've got people who are saying, hey, somebody's fighting my legal battle for me. But today, that disjointed, we don't relate to the language of that time. So the word gospel, the good news, is the fact that someone went out and fought for you and won for you. Now, I don't need somebody to go fight for me. I'm not fighting right now. So it really takes some understanding that I am like with most religions, even most Christian churches are teaching a behavior modification. Hey, God loves you and he did something for you so you could have another chance to please him. I hope not. I hope I don't get another chance because I'm going to fail. I failed the first time, and the second, 500th and 5 millionth time. I don't need another chance because in my human imperfection, I am going to fail at pleasing God. So I need somebody to please God for me. And that, in this case, that was Jesus. That was his son. In fact, it was God himself, Jesus, who pleased God the Father. And he said, I'm going to go to earth. I'm going to live perfectly. I'm going to do everything the Father has asked. I'm going to not do any of the things he's condemned. And I'm going to uphold that behavior and that action, not just in a resentful manner. How sometimes your kids keep your rules, and I'm not going to do it, but it's not because I don't want to. No, Jesus did it because he wanted to do those things. He wanted to do the good things, and he didn't want to do the bad things. That's foreign to me. How many times have I wanted to do those bad things? I mean, heck, enough that I've done them. So on top of that, he did nothing wrong, did everything right, and then we found him guilty of basically nothing, but we killed him anyway. As kind of a representative, the people of that time killed Jesus, though they could find nothing he'd done wrong. In fact, Pilate even says, I can find nothing this guy's ever done wrong. Of course, the record of the crucifixion and the resurrection is held, but what the other part of that gospel is that in his death, he fully exhausted the entire wrath of God that God had against me, against Kevin and Charles and Caleb. He exhausted that wrath. In fact, if you think about it, there's no other creature that God had ever put into creation that could have done that. There's no creature, no angel, no person, no animal that if God poured out all of his wrath on, that it would have withstood it. God alone in Christ could withstand the wrath of God the Father. So he did. And he did it so that we wouldn't have to accomplish anything. We wouldn't have to appease God. He did. And in receiving that truth, in understanding and accepting and confessing that Jesus Christ did that, and I trust that sacrifice fully paid for every sin I've ever committed. Oh, and guess what? Every sin I'll ever commit, not just the ones today and not just the ones yesterday, but the ones tomorrow, the ones in 5 minutes, the ones in 5 years or 50 years, it's satisfactory enough to cover it. And this might tick some people off, that his sacrifice was so great and so infinitely valuable, it actually has the ability to cover all sin. Had Ravi Zacharias been repentant, it could have covered his sin. Had Hitler been repentant, it could have covered Hitler's sin.
Not because those sins were not egregious, but because Christ and his sacrifice was so amazing.
Right. And so the gospel is understanding I don't have to worry about doing a checklist of, did I please God today? Somebody said it, I think it was our pastor who said that it's your obedience isn't, or you're not just sitting here trying to keep a checklist of things you hate doing just to make God happy. That's not the gospel. The gospel is Christ kept that checklist and willingly did so, wanting to please the Father so that he could change me and yet save me when I wasn't necessarily wanting to be changed. How'd I do, Kevin? Charles? Caleb?
Yeah, you did pretty good.
So yes, and amen to everything you said. Here's a way that I found particularly powerful when I heard it, and this I first heard it from Alistair Begg. But I think a lot of times as Christians we hear the charge of hypocrisy, or we hear that we're arrogant and stuff like that. And I would say the next time that you hear something like that, instead of trying to fight against it, use it as an opportunity. And this is one of the coolest things that I ever learned, is to just ask the person in a very conversational way. It's like, wait a minute, what is it that you think I think? What do you think I believe as a Christian? And get them to play a game. Like, I'll tell you what, and I've done this before, and it's actually kind of fun, and it's a great opportunity and way to share the gospel. And you can say, okay, so I'm telling you, I'm a Christian. What is it that you think I believe as a Christian? Tell me, and I'll give you like a letter grade, like A to F, and get them to kind of tell you what they think Christianity is all about. And almost inevitably, you'll get an answer like this. You guys think that you do such and such so good that you get to go to heaven, and all these other peoples who aren't doing things the way you're doing it, they deserve to go to hell. And you just say like F. You just got an F. Fail. That's not at all. That's like the opposite of what we believe. And so what Alistair Begg said is, and this is just, you can almost see people like, cringe when you say it, but you say that, and as a matter of fact, I heard it again this Sunday from our pastor. There are no good people in heaven. There are only bad people in heaven. Because there are no good people. We all deserve, and that includes me. And then I'm very candid, and I tell people, look, the truth is, I think I deserve to go to hell. That's what I think about my own actions. Like, I think I don't deserve to go to heaven at all. I think I deserve to go to hell. There isn't anybody who deserves to go to heaven. Yet Christ loved us so much that he came and paid that price that Pete was talking about, so that he could redeem bad people to go by grace, not earning, by grace, to go to heaven.
Look, the gospel, the good news is, it's the only good news with integrity. What I mean is, it actually takes seriously the bad news.
Right, man.
Of this life, of our nature. You got two other options, roughly speaking. Okay, you can, a naturalistic, atheistic view, which ought to be nihilistic, despair and meaninglessness, but has to still find a way to find something like goodness, purpose, and so forth when it shouldn't be there. And you got on the other end, and a lot of pseudo-Christianity would fall in this category, this positive, upbeat, cheery veneer religion. God, Jesus is my buddy, because he just likes me that much. This is so cool. Of course, I want to be a Christian, and he'll help me out, a lot too. The gospel, the authentic gospel, actually meets, the realistic bad news of this world and who we are and our position in that, with something also real but bigger, what God Himself can do to rescue me from that and from myself. So the gospel has like a rugged truth to it, if it's understood and in contrast to the dark reality that we have to face up to also. I mean, you can pretend it's not there, like the happy hip Christians, pseudo, or you can pretend that, okay, it's there, and yet I find something that motivates me to keep living. I'm going to pretend that that's actually real, even though my worldview doesn't allow it. Or you can embrace both truths, and that's what the cross reconciles.
Yeah, I think that's well said. It's our sin was so egregious, and our destiny without Christ so horrible, and an eternity in hell that we deserved. The cross is evidence of just how bleak our future was. It's like we deserve that. We were on our way. We were earning our way into hell. Another aspect of this is the shallow semi-Christian, or maybe the outsider view of Christianity, is that if you don't believe in Jesus, then you go to hell. And that's really not understanding exactly what's going on here. You don't go to hell because you chose to not believe or believe. It's you deserve to go to hell because of the actions that you took in life. You did things. You sinned against an infinite God. It deserves an infinite punishment. You deserve that. No one is like deserving to do anything other than to go to hell. So it's not just that you refuse Jesus, and in the refusing you deserve to go. It's that you earned it. And yet, despite that, God said, but I love you so much that I am going to provide a way. And how arrogant that it is that, and this is my past, you just say like, yeah, I don't like that way. Well, why is it only got to be one way? Why is it got to be that way? Why not got to be a Christian? It's like, man, that there is a way that God reached down and said, look, you don't deserve it, but this is what it's going to take. I'm going to come down. I'm going to pay for it myself. Because you can't do it. You can't do it. You're unable to. You can't pay this price. It's too big for you. I'm going to pay it because I love you. And if you will accept that, then if you trust in that atonement, then I will attribute it to you in faith. So.
That's right.
Yeah, that's well put, guys. We did get a question come in. Did Bethel, I'm assuming she's talking about Bethel in Redding, California, command the COVID virus away at the beginning? And if so, where can I find this on the internet?
I know of Kenneth Copeland commanding it away, blowing it away ineffectively.
It's like a meme.
I think that Bethel is more sophisticated and wouldn't make the obvious mistake because deep down they know they can't. Right. So they had to stop meeting in person because despite their whole program being about being able to do anything like that.
They did claim that they would be able to heal. It appears back on March 15th, they did make some allegations that if people got COVID there, they would be healed from it.
Oh.
So, because there was actually an apology letter from the church in October over some of this.
Gosh, why even? We don't even need a vaccine, man.
So,
Okay,
This
so
is
well,
this is the
does that mean there's no
all right, I
miracle?
didn't mean to
with
cut you off there,
something-
Kevin.
No, go ahead, y'all.
I was gonna
say, this is the
attempt
problem
to
with
oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Pete.
This is the problem with some of the nuttiness of Christianity, which claims some ability to have supernatural, in and of my own ability to command something in God's authority. It's dangerous, and don't get me wrong, I know where the scriptures are, or I get the scriptural references that they use to justify that I have some authority to say or do or believe some almost magical power, to kind of gain control over the earth. Again, it's not lost on me. I definitely have read those same verses, but it shows a very shallow understanding that God's purposes for us don't just include making things smooth and easy. In fact, as part of that gospel, that God is actually capable of saving us despite the rough circumstances around us and that happen to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, God's not keeping us around in a nice little hamster cage trying to make us happy. There are things much more deep and meaningful than happiness, pleasure, and comfort. Character, morality, truth. Like these things, I think God is much more interested in our character than our comfort.
So
There was a pastor. There was a pastor that once said, and there's some problem to what I'm about to say. And he said, you can tell what's in the barrel, what's in the bucket when you kick it. If the bucket is full of acid and you kick it, you get burned. If the bucket is full of honey and you kick it, you get sugary
Honey?
sweetness on you. And I'm not going to say that again. You're saved or not saved because you're human. But I would say is that God's sanctifying work, that regeneration inside of us, is something that hopefully will begin to change the potential acidic burn thing that comes from us when circumstances press on us and squeeze us. You know what kind of an orange you have when you squeeze it. Is it a good one, or when you cut it open? When you damage that orange, that's where you learn what's inside of it. And if we really trust that God is going to keep us despite the things of the world that happen to us, the disease, the harm, the horror, the atrocities, even just the minor infractions and things, it is our trust towards God that needs to continually be put, not necessarily on display. It's not like I'm just trying to do this for show. I have to trust that God will keep me despite the circumstances, that He's able to save me for eternity despite the momentary.
To save me and to change my character would be and is a supernatural.
Yeah,
right?
man, that's right.
Brings us to, I think, what Charles was going to say, and maybe Caleb. So we're not saying there aren't supernatural. God doesn't act supernaturally, but that also raises the question of how ought we go about distinguishing things that are supernatural from things that rightly have a natural explanation? How do we even approach that?
And I'll say this right at the onset: there seem to be some equally dangerous approaches to this. I've seen a church here locally that sees a demon around every corner. And then on the other side of things, I find myself sometimes drifting towards almost a Christian naturalism, in the
Right.
sense of if I don't have really good evidence for something, I'm going to reject the supernatural being at play here. And I think at one point in my life, I almost drifted to the point of kind of being in that view of
Hmm.
supernatural's kind of over and done with for the most part. And we don't see any of this today. But I think both of those can be equally dangerous.
I agree. So how do we systematically, how can we move toward a consistent method for Christians?
I'm definitely going to let you answer that one
in 13 minutes, but just maybe we could begin thinking about it.
Okay, well, let me open the door a little bit, and then I think you, Caleb, and Kevin are definitely more versed at this subject than I am. But I'll tell you how I do it personally, and then, well, you can take shots at this one. First of all, I want to distinguish the difference, and I think it's important for this that we distinguish the difference between miracle and providence. And sometimes those get confused, but the difference is important. So providence is just how God has organized the world naturally to have certain outcomes. So in other words, there's no supernatural interaction at that moment, so to speak, in providence. Am I on course there? Is that close enough?
Yeah, our definitions really matter here because they'll lead us in different directions. However, on that definition, we're not making a supernatural claim when we claim that God has brought about certain conditions for us, maybe even an answer to prayer. So
sure, right.
So so there's this complete overlap there. There are natural causes, but God's behind nature. So
right, those would be the providence. So it's a natural thing that God has still organized, providentially to occur in this his universe. But it's not miraculous.
Not random. Yet providential, yet natural causes, scientifically speaking.
So not supernatural.
Right.
But he's still behind it.
Right.
And this is kind of the important point that I want to make, still worthy of thanks for his providence.
All right. So is there a different type of evidence or justification that a Christian ought to have to be consistent when making a claim about providence? Or do they need any application other than their worldview that's established in a different way?
This is kind of where I get stuck. But my point is that if God has providentially, so not supernaturally, but providentially done something, I think he's still worthy of being thanked for Thanksgiving. Like, thank you for your providence in this. Now, sometimes I don't know. Like maybe I've prayed for someone who's sick, and I don't know whether it's they were providentially healed through natural circumstances or through the doctor or through I don't know. Sometimes I don't know. Maybe it's a miracle. I don't know. I think there are ways that we can know. I'm not shutting the door on that.
Mm-hmm.
What I wanted to just say is, just for me, in a lot of situations, it's not really clear to me whether this is providentially something to be thankful or miraculously something to be thankful for, but it's clearly something to be thankful for, and I can give thanks. And sometimes it's like, God, I don't know if that was a miracle or not. I'm not trying to discount the chance of supernatural. I'm not trying to insert it. I'm not dismissing it. All I know is I'm really thankful for the way this turned out, and I'm giving you thanks and glory for that. So that's the best that's the best I can do, which is sometimes I just don't know. Most of the time I don't know, and I think that's okay. Now,
so it's when we say we don't know or we're not sure, we're not bringing on ourselves a special sort of proof or epistemic duty, you might say, because we're not making a strong claim anyway. We're just living consistently within our worldview when we're talking about providence and thankfulness for it, right?
I'm not trying to shut the door on this. I definitely want to have the conversation, because I think there are some times where rightly we should recognize things as supernatural and perhaps rightly recognize things as not supernatural. I think we should do that. I'm just saying we don't always have to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we may not be able to do that. And that's okay. We can still be thankful. And that's okay, right? We can be thankful.
Yeah. Yes. This needs a little more tweaking, but yeah, I think I think that's on track. So probably more clarity or particular distinctions would be identifiable in when we make strong claims for something being supernatural or a miracle, right? That would probably bring more definite requirements on us to support our claim. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I think when evaluating and assessing these kind of claims, as a Christian, yes, I can be thankful for something, regardless of knowing whether it's providence or a miracle. But when it comes to miracle claims that I assess, whether it's from someone who's within the Christian worldview or someone without, because there's a lot of claims that are outside of the Christian worldview that also make claims of miraculous things occurring.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have to look at it in a sense of really looking at, can we rule out the natural explanations that could have been in play here? Very much in the same way we've talked about looking at the resurrection event previously. Like, you can take a look at what natural explanations are possible, and if they are not the most reasonable explanation available for these things, even if they're really improbable, it's still very possible that a naturalistic explanation may account for things. Doesn't rule out that it's still not God's providence. But when really getting down to nuts and bolts, I think we have to look at what reasonable explanations are there for this. And while we can't ever rule out every possibility, we can certainly use knowledge and the knowledge of other people who may be an expert in a given field to help us distinguish between, okay, this event is probably not a miracle versus this other event, which, as best as we can tell from the evidence, probably was.
Yeah, I agree that for Christianity to make exclusive claims, it also has to have a methodical filter. Otherwise, everybody else's claims are equally valid just by making them, right? Supernatural claims. So we need a standard, a reasonable standard, high enough to reject, faulty supernatural claims, yet reasonable enough to allow genuine ones. So that's a project I'm just thinking about.
So I can anticipate our skeptic friends saying, this is just another flavor of God of the Gaps, which is of all the natural stuff you know of, you can't explain it, and so therefore a miracle.
Right. Yeah, I would make that objection too, except unless we specify our methodology better. For example, prior probability of something ending up having a natural explanation depends on context. Any sort of test like this is going to have a lot to do with the context of the event. If it's part of a set of or a class of well-established references for comparison, two things could happen in two different contexts, and one may be different in terms of whether there's a prior probability that there's a natural explanation for that or not. I think we should flesh out some examples, but context has got to be a big part of the methodology in either direction. Otherwise, it is just God of Gaps, although, that's depending on how that's presented, that's possibly question begging or no different from naturalism of the gaps. if we're not taking context into consideration.
If we take like some of the other arguments that apologetics typically uses for the existence of God, I think here we understand that those arguments are not. Our skeptic friends might disagree, but I feel very confident to say that our arguments are not God of the gaps arguments, which is to say it's not here's something we don't understand,
Right.
therefore God. What our arguments for God's existence usually do is here's things we do understand,
About science,
and
right?
because we understand these, the natural outcome is X. And so it's not an argument from a gap, it's an argument from knowledge.
It's an inference, the best explanation from data we have.
Exactly.
Scientific.
So and criteria, or a criteria for assigning something a miracle, maybe not the only one, but certainly a good one would be when we understand how the natural world acts in a given situation and we see under those conditions something unnatural happen. So it's not the God of the gaps. As a matter of fact, it's because we know so much about what's happened here, and we know so much, we have positive knowledge about how nature works in this situation, and something unnatural happened, and we know the circumstances are out that, you know, it's like, what else is left? It can't be natural because we understood what happened there. It wasn't that we misunderstood, not that we had a lack of knowledge. We had knowledge there, and the knowledge that we had led us to understand that this was a non-natural event. So like that would be like your near-death experiences and things like that. Like we know this happened, and we know this happened, and we know there are no natural explanations that can explain that.
So one of the arguments is also we could hit the question, are miracles even possible? One of the, and I will probably run out of runway here pretty fast, but one of the things that I'd heard another apologist bring up is, well, for those of us who don't discount the Big Bang as an event, if we look at something, time, space, and matter, all coming from nothing in one cataclysmic cosmic event, the Big Bang, we can point back to and say, well, if we all agree, or if we're pretty certain that happened, how did something, time, space, matter, come from nothing? That's a miracle. So we can point back to the first miracle. Now, for those who are people who believe in the scripture, whether you're going to put creation as about 10,000 years ago or 10 million years ago or 10 billion years ago, the point is at some point there was nothing, and then all things came out of nothing. The how that happened, regardless of us trying to sit down and piece out, you know, all the little flow chart of what happened to cause that, we can't explain it, and there's nothing like it that we could ever point to and say, oh, well, this explains it, you know, verbatim. There's a lot of theory, but nothing we can just point to. And if we say that's got to be one of the first miracles, Kevin, what do you think of that as a support that at least miracles are possible?
Yeah, and you know, already on a Christian framework, you know, God transcends and is other than his creation, but it only exists because not only his past creation of it, but his continued and current sustenance of it. In other words, the laws of nature themselves are only running the way they do because right now God is continuing to wish them to do so, and there wouldn't be any matter to conform to laws and patterns were God not upholding that at this. So a dynamic view of creation rather than just a static, distant, and removed past view of God's creativity. I mean, you know, within that framework, you have to believe that, you know, God can do what he wills within a material framework that he's upholding all the time anyway. So philosophically, yes. On particular occasion, that's where our discernment and methodology has to be developed. Distinguish which occasions we would call what.
Well, that's a really good start to this conversation. Hopefully we'll get to continue it more either in private, or if people liked us diving into it here, maybe they want to see it continued here. So be sure to let us know what you think, what you thought. We have just about wrapped up for the night. We're actually on time tonight, so that's a good thing. We're usually running over by a few minutes. So hope you enjoyed the discussion tonight. Hope it brought some value to your thought processes on some of these issues we talked about. Please hit us back with comments, questions, complaints. Love to interact with all those. So, and if there are any questions you have that you want to see discussed, drop those in the chat, and we watch for those coming through that we can use on the show later on. So hope you enjoyed it. Hit subscribe, hit notifications if you like it, share it around. That would be a huge support if you share this with somebody who needs to be a part of this discussion. All right, that's all I got.
Say bye, Tukey. Say bye, Tukey.
Bye, Tukey.
What you be?